It's my pleasure to welcome Mamta Chaudhry to discuss her recently published first novel, Haunting Paris. For all of you longtime Miami residents, you might remember WTMI classical radio station, where Mamta was programming director for many years. She lives here in Coral Gables, but she grew up in Calcutta, India, a city represented by many religious traditions with multiple synagogues and mosques and churches. And it is there where she was exposed to multiple traditions and religions. And throughout the years, she and her husband spent extended time visiting India as well as France. Mamta and I met through a dear mutual friend who many of you may know, Joanne Letterman. Joanne said to me, Robyn, I don't want you to miss out on hearing from a gifted writer named Mamta and her fabulous new book combining love and loss, Paris, the Holocaust, and mystery in the most exquisite way. And then she went on to say that her narration brought her so much comfort and thought it would do the same for our Beth Ora congregants. So with that kind of introduction, I couldn't wait to speak to her about this intriguing novel written by a Hindu woman who is neither French nor Jewish, but who wrote this book based in Paris with a Holocaust thread. So for me, questions abound that I know Mamta will get a chance to elaborate. Questions such as, what motivated you to write your first novel? How did a Hindu woman living in Miami, Florida come to write about Paris and the Holocaust? Your book focuses attention on this main character, Sylvie, who is grieving the loss of her lover. What inspired you to write so sensitively about this topic of loss and love and memory? And have you personally experienced a profound loss in your life? I mean, there's so many. Like, do you believe in ghosts or spirits? What are you trying to convey about life and death? Why was anti-Semitism needed for your story? Were you surprised by how your life directed you to such a theme? And what did you learn about discrimination and fear of the other? I have so many more questions, but I just wanted to like kind of percolate some of them, which I know you will end up touching upon. Mamta, it is so wonderful to welcome you to our Beth Ora community, and welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. We are just grateful.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to Joanne Letterman for connecting us and to Robin for just jumping on the suggestion and inviting me, and to all of you for coming. You know, we may have blank calendars as far as going out anywhere, but our virtual calendars tend to be pretty full. So I know you have an embarrassment of riches to choose from, and I'm just delighted you're here. So actually, Robin brought up a whole host of really interesting questions. And if I don't answer them right in the beginning, I'll talk a little bit about the book. And if there's stuff left unanswered or different things that come up, you know, feel free to jump in. But I'll just set the scene a little bit. You know, like most of us, I'm sitting home right now. Just the thought of going to the airport gives me hives, let alone getting on a plane. But if we can't go to Paris right now, in any case, they won't let us in. We can bring Paris to us because, you know, as Ernest Hemingway wrote, Paris is a movable feast. And I've always liked what he said in his memoir. He said, there is never any ending to Paris. We always return to it, no matter who we were, or how it was changed, or with what difficulties or ease it could be reached. Paris was always worth it. Well, there may not be any ending to Paris, but there is always a beginning. And the first time I saw Paris, I felt a shock of recognition, and I couldn't explain why it should feel so familiar to me. It's so different from the tropical city where I grew up, as Robin said, in Calcutta. And it's so different from the American subtropical city, Miami, where I now live. In a way, of course, Paris exercises such a hold on all our imaginations, from books we've read, films we've seen, music we've heard. But this was a little bit more than that. I felt a sense of deja vu. And my husband laughed and he said, well, maybe in another life. Because, he's married into a culture where talk of past lives is more common than your remarks about the weather. Many years after that first trip, I ended up writing a book about Paris. And at its core, Haunting Paris is a love letter to the city. It's not a funny Valentine like Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, but it's layered and complicated and heartbreaking in the way that love can often be. So, Paris is one of those cities that's easy to love, but hard to know. Before I even went, friends, both French and American, told me that to cross the threshold, c'est difficile. Well, for me, it seemed more than difficile, it seemed impossible. I am so clearly an étrangère, a stranger, a foreigner, an outsider. So I have to tell you, I didn't set out to write about Paris, and certainly not from this perspective. I'm not French, not Jewish, neither man nor ghost. But I will tell you that as writers, we don't always choose our stories. Sometimes they choose us. And so it was with this story. So one day I was walking down Ile Saint Louis, and, as one does when one is traveling, or actually I do it even here, looking into lighted windows, imagining myself living in those homes, in imagining those lights. And then suddenly I heard a drift of music coming down from a lighted window down to the street. And I couldn't see who was playing, but I had this really vivid impression of a man leaning forward, listening very intently. And I kept returning to that snatch of music, to that impression of the man listening. And as you'll see, the man was Julien, who had returned to the woman he loved and the place he called home while he lived. The music had summoned him back to a world where he had unfinished business. So the novel is set in the summer of 1989, which was the bicentennial of the French Revolution, that seminal moment in French history, which gave us the glorious motto that you can still see everywhere, every public building, chiseled into every monument: liberté, égalité, fraternité. So all Paris is getting ready for this marvelous bicentennial celebration. But up in her apartment, Sylvie is mourning the loss of her lover, Julien, who died several months before. Suddenly, quite by accident, she dislodges a letter hidden in his desk. Now, she knew that Julien's sister and her two little girls had perished in the Holocaust. But what she didn't know was that Julien always believed that one of the girls had managed to escape, and he devoted years to secretly tracking his niece. So now Sylvie takes up the quest where he left off, and she is quite unaware that she's watched over by Julien's ghost. And her journey takes her deep into the secrets of Julien's past and to the year 1942, when the roundups of Jews was taking place in Paris, and the city singularly failed to live up to its own glorious promise of liberté, égalité, fraternité. So, this is a love story in which one of the lovers is dead. It's a mystery in which the detective is a pianist who is so cripplingly shy that her nickname is Sylvie La Timide. It is a historical novel which has really urgent resonances in the present. And it's a ghost story in which the ghost is the least terrifying thing of all. You know, Robin asked earlier if I believe in ghosts. Do I believe in ghosts? No, of course not. And yet, you are always in their company in Paris. You know, as you walk down the cobblestone streets, you can sense them around you, and they are particularly thick on Ile Saint Louis. And I just often want to turn my head and ask them, who are you? What draws you back? But of course, they retreat into the shadows and into silence. So my novel was written in and around Notre Dame. And in fact, a lot of the scenes take place in the cathedral. And it just so happened that the night the fire broke out in the cathedral, Daniel and I, my husband and I, were getting ready to leave for Paris. So the taxi was outside our house, and a friend texted me. She said, Notre Dame is burning. And I flipped open my laptop and I saw these pictures of, you know, the cathedral, like some filigreed luminaria just going up in flames. And I just burst into tears. And I couldn't explain why I should feel so personally bereft. You know, this is not my city. It's not my country. It's not my history. It's not my religion. But for some reason, it seemed extremely personal. And I know I'm not the only one. There were millions of people around the world who felt that visceral connection. And maybe just for a moment, what Benjamin Franklin once said was still true, that everyone has two countries, their own and France. But behind Notre Dame's soaring towers that reach for the sky, there is a museum that sinks down into the earth. That's the Memorial de la Déportation. And it was at the deportation memorial that I became aware of the dark shadows underpinning the City of Light. And that's when the story took a much darker turn. There's a bronze circle, if you've been there, you know this. There's a bronze circle on the floor, chiseled with the words, they went to the end of the earth and they did not return. And then my hair stood straight up as I remembered the French word for ghost, revenant, one who returns. So that became the first line of my book. And I also had the answer to my question, what draws you back? So you know what I'll do? I'll just read very briefly a couple of paragraphs from the first page of the book. Here is the book. This is the hardcover. It's now come out in paperback as well. And it is the only thing I believe that during this time of our being homebound has actually lost weight. Okay, so this is the opening of Haunting Paris. They call us revenants, those who return. Restless for this world, we pass each other in mute recognition, for to be silent and solitary is our essential condition. But death doesn't end our thirst for a human touch, a human voice calling our name. And so I haunt these familiar quays, this familiar river. Music drifts down from Sylvie's window, and I linger until it comes to an end. The scent of lilacs on the breeze stirs dormant phantoms to life, but music is sorcery more potent. Though bound to time's measure, it exists on a plane beyond time, where there is no past and no future, There is only the present in which the dead revisit this world. Night after night, I wait until the last notes fade away and Sylvie comes to the window at last. I retreat into the shadows as one after another the beautiful mansions along Quai d'Anjou spring to light, transforming those in the gloom below into a throng of ghosts. Occasionally, a passing figure pauses in a pool of lamplight to light a cigarette or glance at a watch. Squandered time, the most enduring of regrets. In the end, a lifetime is not enough. The heart yearns for more. Who can reason with desire? The heart has its reasons that reason cannot know. So, one second. I always feel this should be wine if I'm talking, about Paris, but I do want to be coherent for the next hour. So when I heard the voice of the ghost, and we writers hear voices all the time, it was instantly familiar to me. See, right now we all know what it's like to be in a sealed room, in front of the microphone, cut off from the rest of the world. But as Robin pointed out, I did this for many years in various cities, including Miami. How many of you remember our late lamented classical music radio station, WTMI? Ah, okay. So some people do. Well, we've all betrayed our age now because it's been a while. So when I was an announcer there and program director, I knew what it felt like to go out into the city as a disembodied voice, to go into homes that I would never enter, to reach people that I would never know. I could only imagine, and I felt like I was in their world, but not of it. And so, in that sense, what gave me a way into this story is that a ghost is the ultimate outsider in the world, but not of it. So, as I followed Julien's ghostly voice, wherever it led me, I found myself at the Memorial de la Shoah in the Marais, the Holocaust Museum there. And I was doing lots of research for the book. And the archivist had suggested some books, so I had them piled up. I was reading. And then this elderly gentleman came and sat down across from me. And he had the saddest eyes I've ever seen. And the librarian came up and asked him, she said, "Are you here to do research?" And he goes, "No, témoignage, testimony." So as he was going off to record his memories of the time he had lived through, that I was just researching and writing about, but which was real to him, he looked at this book that I was reading, which is called La Grande Rafle du Veldiv, the Great Roundup of the Jews. And he said, "That I know." It was sort of a shock to me. And I asked him, I said, "But Monsieur, isn't it hard to relive that time, even in memory?" And he said, "Yes, it's very hard, but it's very necessary." And I found that this was true, that so many people for the rest of their lives never talked about les années noires, the dark years that they had lived through. But I did speak to some survivors, some people who wanted to share their stories. And one of them was this delightful woman called Eva Danzon. She changed her name from Eva to Francine. And as a child, she managed to escape from Paris to Nice, which at that time was not under German occupation. The Nazis hadn't yet made it there, but they would eventually. And she survived the war, but her family in Paris did not. And many years later, when she came back to Paris and she went to her parents' old apartment, one of the neighbors in the apartment told her, she said that, another neighbor coveted your parents' apartment because it was so much nicer than his. So he denounced them to the police as Jews. So he then moved into their apartment and he lived there and died there alone. Not even his children would come to visit him. And when he died, he was carried out on a stretcher. But your parents, she told Francine, who is now Eva again, your parents walked out of here on their own 2 feet to meet their death with their head held high. And then the neighbor says to Eva, she said, I always hoped you would come back, and I saved this for you. And she held up a little ribbon, a cord. Do you remember the kind of things that used to be on bedspreads where they'd have this little tasseled woven cord around it? And she held up this little golden cord, and Eva remembered that she had seen it all her life in her parents' bedroom. Um, this little remnant, which was all she had from her childhood and her past. And her son eventually wrote a memoir about her experiences, their family story, and he called it Le Cordon, after that golden cord. So for me, it was, I can't tell you how significant that when my book came out many years later, and I went to Paris. On the eve of Rosh Hashanah, I went to Eva Danzon's house and I said, Here, I brought my book for you. And she says, Thank you, but it's about time. And it is true that it took me a long time to write the book, but also she's 95. So I can imagine that she felt the press of time a little more urgently. And, I realized then that's why so many people, after a lifetime of silence, were ready and willing to talk about their experiences, to bear witness to what they had lived through, to make sure their stories were not forgotten. And I think to remind us all that when we said never again, that we really meant it. And we ignore these stories at our own peril. It's a sad fact of life that I think all of us here know is that the really important things in life, we don't think to ask our parents, our grandparents, all the questions that we have only occur to us when the sole people who could answer our questions can no longer speak to us. And it was in Paris, where I was clearly an outsider, it was not my home, that I started wondering what it would feel like to be a foreigner in your own country. That had happened to my parents. When the British left India, they split it into two countries, into India and Pakistan. And it's one of those sad ironies of history that a struggle for independence that had been fought on Gandhi's principles of nonviolence should, at the very moment of victory, result in a massacre and a bloodbath. So my parents were from the northwest part of India, Punjab, and this was now divided into India and Pakistan, and they were on the wrong side of the religious divide. So they had to leave what was formerly India to go into what was now India, but to them a foreign country, and they never returned. And, that's what happened to a lot of Jews in France too. The country they had called their own for years and years and years suddenly did not consider them French citizens. Um, they stripped them of their citizenship. And this was used as a sop to French consciences afterwards. They said that, oh, it's amazing. Um, Only 5% of French Jews died in the death camps, the concentration camps, as opposed to 95% of Jews from other countries. But you know what? That's just an accounting trick, a sleight of hand. If you factor back in the people that they had stripped of their citizenship, then 95% of French Jews also did not survive. So, looking back on these atrocities, we always ask, why didn't people speak up at the time? Couldn't they see what was going on? Were they afraid? Were they willfully blind? And when the tide of war turned finally, there were so many résistants de dernière minute, last minute resistance, who would say, oh, during the war, I sheltered a Jewish family in my basement. During those horrible years, I smuggled a French child to safety. But you know what? If everyone who claims to have done that had actually done that, we wouldn't be dealing with this incomprehensible number of 6 million. So I thought what I was writing about was safely in the past. But as William Faulkner says, the past is never dead. It's not even past. And we hear its ominous echoes now, as Jewish cemeteries are being defaced by swastikas in Alsace, which is where the character Julien is from. Synagogues are being attacked in France and in America. And in India, a very right-wing nationalist movement has taken over politically, which is once again trying to divide the country along religious lines, setting up conflict and violence among Hindus and Muslims. And one day people might look back and ask us the same questions. Couldn't you see what was going on? Why didn't you do anything? The poet Audre Lorde said, your silence will not protect you. And I think that's true. James Baldwin said it in a way that just still makes my hair stand up. He said, we are all in this together. If they come for you in the morning, they'll be coming for us that night. And so I have always wondered what it would take to be the lone voice in a room that speaks up when it would have been easier and perhaps safer to remain silent. In this novel, A Passage to India by E.M. Forster, Adela Quested, a young English woman, comes to India for the first time. And now, remember, this is set in India before independence. So this was during the days of the British Raj. So she comes to India and she goes to visit the Marabar caves, and she accuses Dr. Aziz of rape. You can imagine the uproar that there is in the British community, and they all gather together. The next day, there's going to be a trial to try Dr. Aziz, and she has to give testimony. And they're all gathered at the English only club. Now, I was born long after independence, so I don't know this myself, but my father told me that, in those days, of course, no Indians could go to the clubs, but they had signs on the door saying, dogs and Indians not allowed, just as they had signs in Paris cafes that said, dogs and Jews not allowed. So at this club, feelings are running really high and people are talking about the trial the next day. And then the English schoolmaster gets up and he says, I believe Dr. Aziz is innocent. Well, you can imagine the outcry of traitor. How can you say this? You are going against your own people. He said, no, I am waiting for the verdict of the courts. If he is guilty, I resign my service and I leave India. In any case, I resign from the club now. So that always stayed with me. But Fielding, the schoolmaster, was one of the ruling class. He was older. He was very sure of his place in the world. So I started thinking, what would it mean for someone to speak up who is very young, poor, and in the context of the story, an outsider, she's of a lower class. So in the story, silence is very complicated. You know, when the resistants were captured, they were tortured by the Gestapo to give the names of other people in the cell, and they had it figured down to how many minutes they could hold out under torture so that the cell could disband. So, under those circumstances, remaining silent was an act of great courage. But in so many other instances, it turned out to be an act of cowardice, or even worse, of complicity. So, as my character Sylvie finds out, that courage doesn't mean that you're unafraid to do something. It means you're very afraid, but you do it anyway. All right. So that's what I had to say about the book. I want to leave lots of time for discussion, for questions, for your own, comments. But I have two requests. If you have read my book, thank you very much. Just please, no spoilers. Don't give away the ending or the mystery. And if you haven't read it but would like to, obviously it's available online as Kindle, as audiobook, hardcover, softcover. But if you can, please buy it from a wonderful local independent bookstore from Books and Books. I mean, Mitchell Kaplan is just one of the pillars of our community. And I want to make sure that when we are all out and about again, that the bookstore still has its doors open for us to go in and browse.
I
So
made
that's it
arrangements
from,
with them to order your books, so they should be there for anybody who wants to purchase it.
oh, thank you, Robin. That is such a great kindness to me. Thank you very much. Okay, so fire away. I'm going to put you guys back on um, gallery view so that I can see you when you raise your hand or when you have a question. And I may have to peer closer when the pictures are smaller. And it doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment, or if you've been to Paris, or if you have family that you've heard
Does
stories
anybody
from.
have any questions that they want to ask? Laura.
Uh, I love the way you speak, and I loved hearing your writing. And I want to tell you, not only do I remember WTMI, in my other lifetime, I worked as the advertising rep for the New World Symphony for 2 years. So all of your people, I'm surprised I haven't met you, but will you talk it sounds like a wonderful novel. Will you talk, you hinted a little bit, it the process of going with where it took you. Can you speak a little bit more on that and talk about maybe what you learned while you were writing it? I would love to hear about that.
Oh, that's a wonderful question, and I will get to it in a second. But since I have here a kindred soul with classical music, let me just share this with you. You know, because I'm from India, people always ask me, "Are you a doctor?" And when I worked at TMI, I would say, "No, I'm a DJ." Of course, in classical music, we call them announcers. We don't say DJ. So they'd say, "Oh, but you're also a doctor, right?" And I'd say, "No, I'm just a DJ." So when I finally got my doctorate from the University of Miami, and people still ask me this question, "Oh, you're from India, are you a doctor?" And I say, "Yes, yes, actually, I am a doctor." I don't tell them I'm a doctor of English, because I really believe that books can also cure what ails the world. But to get to Laura's question, which is a very readerly and writerly question, there are many writers who are extremely efficient, and I wish I were one of them because I would not be publishing so late in life. I must be the world's oldest debutante, but although this is my first novel to be published, it's not the first I wrote, and I have a stack of rejections to prove it. But I write to find out where the story is going, you know? So if I knew in the beginning, like a lot of very successful and efficient writers, and my husband wishes I were one of those people who would just write down an outline and then follow it. But I don't know. So when I heard Julien's voice, I was like, well, who is he listening to? Why is this woman playing the music? Why is he hanging about and down in the street? Why doesn't he go up to see her? And one question led to another, and I kept following it. But it says, Robert Frost says, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And I was surprised so many times in reading this. I had no idea that I would actually go into such a dark place, that I would actually go into the roundups. And so much of that meant that I had to keep researching. And as I researched, I would find something that led in a totally different direction, and I would follow the trail. And let me just tell you all that having to do research in Paris is not a hardship. So it was fine with me if the story suddenly took a different turn and I had to go back and do some more research. But as to what I found out, there were so many things I learned that I didn't know, having gone to Paris for so many years and spent so much time. I did not know, for instance, that there is a cemetery in Paris that is just for the beheaded people. They were big on guillotines, so there is a cemetery for the decapitates. Now, I don't think that is true of any other country. And there were just lots of little things like that I found out. But one thing I had to be very sure, even if I was setting a book in Miami, I would have to research it. Is this street really, is it in the Grove? Is it in the Gables? You would want to make sure because you want the reader to know that you're a reliable source of information. But in Paris, I had to make doubly sure, and I was really anxious that I might get it wrong. And somebody would come up to me and say, but Madame, this arrondissement is completely wrong, or this building is in a completely different part of Paris. And one thing about, if you spent any time in Paris, you know this, if you get anything wrong about Paris, Parisians will be only too thrilled to tell you that. So I was anxious about that. But if I felt a responsibility to get that right, imagine how much more of a moral responsibility I felt to get right the subject of the Holocaust. So I felt two different, very strong, not burdens, but requirements of me when I was writing. So that's a very long answer to your question.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you.
So I know I'm going to get to everybody's questions, but somebody here, and I won't call them out, is in the middle of writing their first book. Do you have any advice for them?
Yes. I will tell you that the only thing I have in common with Elizabeth Warren is the three words, still she persisted. So don't give up. I will tell you that the world was not clamoring for a novel by me. Okay. I wrote it because I felt compelled to write it. And also giving it up was harder than going on with it. And whoever this person is who's writing the novel, let me just type into the chat box my website, okay? And this is for everybody. You can reach me through my website. Let's see if I spelled it correctly. It's mamtachaudhry.com. So if you look up the chat box, and then of course, Robyn can tell you later too. You can reach me through my email if you think of a question later, or if you just want to get in touch. Or if the red tent wants to talk about the book, anything like that, you can reach me. So for the other debut writer here, reach out if there's anything I can do to, give you some advice. I received a lot of very generous advice along the way, and I'm happy to pass it on.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, hands up. Phyllis.
Okay, I do remember WTMI very clearly, and I remember your gentle voice. I used to love listening to your voice. I even spoke to you on the phone very briefly one time regarding this, the music. But I'd like to focus on your sensitivity. You seem to have a heightened sensitivity to people and sounds, and your imagination gets fired up. And you mentioned the writer hearing voices of your character. Would you talk about that, please?
Certainly. And let me tell you about music, since we all seem to have this common thread here. On my website, there's a whole section. If you go into the book and you do a drop-down menu, there are pictures of Paris. So you can feel you're going there without actually, good heavens, buying a ticket. And there is a whole soundtrack to the book. All the pieces of music that I mentioned in the book are there. So for instance, if I talk about Chopin's Barcarolle, you can hear it there. And Phyllis, it's true that, a lot of people talk about their characters, lots of physical descriptions. They will tell you she was tall, she was short, she was eyes this color and whatever. And for me, what brings a character to life is not so much what they look like, because we can all imagine, every one of us who's a reader and has read voraciously knows how much your imagination is engaged. But to me, what's important is what a character sounds like. That's the voice I'm talking about hearing. And in my book, I want to make sure that even if you don't know it's Julien speaking, or Sylvie, or the American characters, that just by the way they speak, you can tell, yes, that's who it is. So that's one reason, although I love music, I don't listen to music when I'm writing, because I can hear this so much more clearly and hear what they're saying to me. And, it's not like they're dictating the novel. Good heavens, I wish they would. It would be so much easier. It's not like you're this medium and you hear the voice and you just take it down. It's that they are speaking in their own voices. And this ties back to Laura's question too, is that you might want the story to go in a certain direction, but the way the character is acting or speaking is going to resist that. And you'll find yourself at this moment of sort of struggle with the character till you give up and say, okay, what is it you really want to do? And that's when you can tell the book takes off, when you're not pushing them, to do a certain thing. So.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Andrea?
Thank you. I just wanted to say I especially enjoyed your reading the first part of the book. The prose, it was so poetic, it was just beautiful. And you've mentioned so many authors that inspire you with their philosophies, their words, but do you have an author who you especially love or who inspired you in the area of your descriptive language? I mean, it wouldn't be Hemingway, we love him, but he wasn't known for that. Are there authors that you modeled or admired or inspired you to write that beautifully?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much. I have always had a great regret all my life that if I could have chosen to be one thing, it would have been a concert pianist. And I don't have a shred of musical talent. So working at a classical radio station, you know, I could say, I will now play Mozart's 27th piano concerto. And all I did was put on the record or later on the compact disc. So, you know, I always felt, well, that's the closest I'm going to get to it. But then I realized that I actually do have an instrument and its language. And it has its own rhythms and cadences, and you can control the tempo. So that's very much part of my writing. And Andrea, I'm so glad you picked up on the language, because you know there are some readers who read for what the story is. You know, you go to what happened, what happened, what happened. And then there's some readers who want to also read for how the story is told. So one writer that I was very influenced by, but I don't think I can, you know, compare myself in any way to her, because she was a somebody who was in a class by herself, and that's Virginia Woolf. But I do remember when I was getting my doctorate that I was writing about Woolf, and especially about To the Lighthouse. And there was this scene about a dinner party. Okay. And I read this scene and I was just breathless from reading it. And I said, I don't want to write about other writers' books. I want to write my own book, and I want to write a dinner scene. And so when you read the book, you'll see that there are actually two dinner parties. But I was very influenced by her ability to go back and forth in time, to have like this impressionistic writing, you know, where you don't have to spell every single thing out. And the other writer I'm very grateful to and inspired by is Marilyn Robinson, who again is, you know, at least I choose good models. Hey, I may never get to that level, but at least I'm aiming high. And I studied with Marilyn Robinson for a bit, and I learned a lot about writing from her. So those are the two that I can
Thank
think
you
of.
so much. Interesting answer.
Thanks, Andrea.
Anybody else? Yes, Marcy.
Marcy, you have to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Thank you.
Yeah.
First, I want to say how much I'm enjoying this. You are such a lovely person and a lovely speaker and a natural storyteller, and I'm really enthralled with this so much. I just want to share that with you. The first question has to do with you running into the man in the library who was a survivor. And part of your research, I imagine, was talking to some survivors, and I was wondering if you could share about that experience at all. And the other thing was, did you know from the beginning where your story was going, or was it also a discovery for you as you were writing and hearing your characters to just see how it evolved?
Okay, so the first part, yes, I did speak to survivors. And in fact, there's one in Miami that I spoke to, not for my book, but afterwards. I don't know if you all know Alan Hall. He and Laurie Gold live in Miami, and just, you know, he had written a memoir about his time, but he was talking about Poland. Yeah, I did speak to survivors. And Marcy, it was almost like a re-traumatization for them, because a lot of people would never speak of that time at all. And in my book, I talk about a scene where the survivors come back from the camps. And what everybody notices is this almost eerie silence, because there are no words to explain what happened. And so for me to try to write something about something that was unspeakable, how do you speak about the unspeakable? So one of my concerns was to write it in a very in a way that was not heavy-handed, that was not buying into this there's a whole industry about books about the Second World War or about survivors, and it's almost become like you could put the blank of Auschwitz and fill in the blank, and you have a story. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted the individual stories to come out. And in talking to them, yes, I discovered a lot of things that I didn't know and I wouldn't have known, but I am glad to know because it needs to be known. And so then I felt an renewed, I don't know, push to tell this story because it is still so, so timely, sadly, timely. So somebody had a dog in the picture. Was that a little doggy that came on? No?
I'm sorry, I
Latu.
had a second question.
Oh, yes,
The
yes.
second question was, did you know how it was going to end when you started, or did that evolve?
That completely evolved. Sorry, Marcy, I just got
Sure.
sidetracked there. And I didn't know where it was going. I didn't, even in the beginning, I had no idea that I was setting it in 1989 because these Americans are visiting Paris then. So it's going to be a time of great, rejoicing. And then the fact that 1989 is juxtaposed with 1942, sort of gives both the celebration of the time and the immense tragedy. So I didn't know from moment to moment. I was just taking down, writing whatever was coming to me then. But it's like shooting a film, you take so much, shoot so many scenes, and then you come back to the editing room and you cut out what's not necessary. And then you see the shape and the narrative arc of the story evolve. And that's when it becomes really clean and clear where you were going. And then when I got to the end, I said, oh my God, from the first sentence, when it said, they call us revenants, those who return, I said, this is where I was going, and I didn't even know it. But then once I was at the end, I could look back and say, okay, I need to work this in so that it has the narrative arc to it. So I told you, for me, it's a messy process, but hey, all writers work differently. So
Thank you.
I think Kathy had her hand up.
Yes, I did. As another veteran WTMI listener in a shared office with two of us, very dear friend of mine, and two radios on at 8:30 in the morning and not off until 4:30 in the afternoon.
well,
And
how
that 3
nice
o'clock
is that?
switch over was, oh, great, we're getting toward the end of the day because Mamta's on with the program. And, I
That's
couldn't
so
tell you what the
funny.
lead-in music was, but I recognize it every time I hear it now. I am one of
I'll
those
tell you
people
what
who,
it is, Kathleen. It's the Birds by Ottorino Respighi.
of course, yes,
So,
Respighi, I had forgotten. And as you say, we're not going to give away our ages, but it was a while ago.
yeah.
I am one of these people who does more reading with their ears than their eyes these days. Partly because it just seems to work better for me, and partly because I love listening to somebody reading a good story. And this was one. I was curious to know to what, if any extent, the author and the creator of these characters has any say in the selection or auditioning process of the narrators. Your narrator is absolutely wonderful. I was enthralled just listening.
Okay, tell me more. Who, the woman, the man, or both?
Actually, both. It usually bothers me to have audiobooks where it's like a round the table reading of a play. That puts me off. But you had the two, and I realized I was simply listening to the story. I wasn't getting involved in hearing either reader's voice, and yet the voices were so true. Did you have any input into the selection process?
This is so gratifying for me to hear because I have to confess something. I've never heard the whole book through because it's like listening to your own words. But Yes, I did have a part in the audition. You know, all my life I've auditioned for stuff on the stage, TV, radio. And for once I got to sit on the other side and choose. They suggested the woman. They said she's an opera singer and, you know, she would
Okay.
be very good. And so I said, great. And then the they suggested a few men, but their voices didn't quite do it for me. So then I listened to a bunch of little uh, snippets from other audiobooks. And do you guys know this fabulous book called Suite Française by
No.
Irene Nemirovsky?
No, I don't.
Listen, read it even before you read mine, but read
Oh.
mine too. But read Irene Nemirovsky. She is amazing. And the whole thing with the Holocaust was very personal for her. But the guy read the man who read Suite Française in the audiobook. I liked his voice, so I suggested it, and they said, "Yeah, we would like to use him." So, Kathleen, thank you. You know, that's very nice for me to know that it worked as an audiobook.
It
because
definitely worked.
That's good.
Maybe we'll take one more question, Enid.
Yes, I'm going to be very careful in the question I ask because I don't want to do a spoiler alert. I have so many questions. I wanted to ask you how you found your heroes.
Well, one of the things with Julien was, you know, as I said, this presence that I sensed of spirits around, and it has nothing to do with ghosts as such. It is more the spirit of a city. You know, as you'll see when you read the book, that Julien is not just a person in himself, but he represents the history of Paris in a way, because he has access to information that people who are living in the present don't. He can go back to the past, he can go back in history and see how old, how long the tradition of anti-Semitism is in France. It did not start, you know, with the Nazis. It just fed into that. And then with Sylvie, you know, Julien has this picture perfect life. So I wanted someone who was the opposite of a picture perfect life, someone who was kind of like I was, except only in this one respect. I mean, she's a pianist, for heaven's sake. So you know that I projected some of my dreams onto her, but I'm not shy, which she is. But she has always felt like an outsider looking in on other people's lives. So those two things combined gave me the two major characters of Julien and Sylvie. And, you know, more than anything else, more than the World War II story, the Holocaust story, the Paris thing, what it is a story, as Robin so accurately said, it's about love and it's about loss, you know. So that I think is universal, that it doesn't matter where the story is set, it will speak to you. And Enid, if you want to email me your other questions,
Thank you.
I will be very happy to respond.
Thank you.
So I love it when a presentation leaves you with so many more questions, so that we can go back and read the book and tell everybody else about it too. And you have been such a joy. It's been really wonderful. But I had to take the opportunity to like close off this discussion, because beginning tomorrow night actually, but we're celebrating it on Friday night, is a holiday for us called Purim. And it's a holiday in which we tell the story of the Jews who are living in this ancient Persian in the 4th century BCE. And it's in a huge kingdom of 27 provinces in which the Jews experience discrimination, anti-Semitism, and really almost annihilation, but for one person who puts herself on the line and speaks up and realizes, had she not been there in that moment as in the royal castle, that the Jews could have and probably should have been eliminated, annihilated completely. So my question is, I guess, in pulling this all together, we're talking about an ancient story from the 4th century BCE. You wrote so emotionally and intimately about the Holocaust that happened many centuries, thousands of years later. What did you learn about discrimination, about systemic racism, about what has changed, if anything?
Yeah, that's so perceptive, Robin. I mean, with Queen Esther, and I think that's with Purim, which is one of the most joyous of festivals in that way. And it's always struck me as just remarkable that it's a woman who speaks up, and in my book, it's a woman who speaks up. I'm trying to think. Okay, so I've been fortunate that I have not personally experienced some of the kinds of discrimination. As I said, I was born in an independent India, so I did not experience it there. I was part of the majority, so I did not experience it there. I come here and I'm part of a minority, but I did not experience it. But when people ask me about discrimination, it always starts with language. When you other someone, when you make it us and them, it starts with the language. And when you dehumanize people, it is all to do with, if you call people as the Nazis and the French did, if you call people vermin, or as is done here sometimes for some minorities, when you say people are vermin, you're saying it's okay to exterminate them. So, I think that one of the ways in which we can try and work towards this understanding is by being very careful of the language we use. And one middle school teacher had asked me, how can she talk to her students about racism? And I said, just alert them to how language can construct an otherness, which is not intrinsic to us, but is imposed on us. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I'm delighted to be here and, stay in touch. I love responding to readers, and I'm going to sign off now so you can talk about me to your heart's content.
What makes you think we want to do that? We will be in touch.